Welcome to M4LU, Moms for Liberty's academic approach to the ideologies and issues facing our kids in the classroom. It is our mission to inform, equip, and empower parents with knowledge, understanding, and practical tools so that they may effectively advocate for their children and the future of our country. Hi, I'm Robin Steenman, Director of M4LU. Each month, M4LU will focus on a single topic and approach it from multiple angles in order to equip you, the parents, grandparents, and everyday American citizens with a deep understanding of what it is, how to navigate it or combat it. We do this via 101 and 102 courses, a watch party, if a corresponding documentary film is available, and via the monthly book club. Each month, you will also find a corresponding toolkit added to our resource library at m4lu.org. We work hard to curate the information you need into a smart book for download, presentation slides, which are particularly useful for chapter chairs, a video section where our 101 and 102 recordings will live, white papers, articles, podcasts, and much more. January 2025 is the inaugural month of M4LU, and this month we are focusing on the issue of social emotional learning, or SEL. What does the average American citizen really know about SEL? We go to Christy Slape, our mom on a mission in Williamson County, Texas, to find out what people are saying about this ideology.
Hey y'all, this is Christy, mom on a mission with Moms for Liberty. Today I'm in Williamson County, Texas at the local farmers market, and today we're asking people what they know about social emotional learning. Let's go.
I'm Colleen.
I'm Jim.
Y'all are parents?
We're parents and grandparents.
Yes.
I'm a behavior interventionist in the Round Rock ISD School District.
My name is Maddie.
Maddie, what do you do?
I am a hot sauce maker.
Yeah.
Maddie'sHotSauce.com.
I hear that you might have been an educator previously.
I was.
I'm a pastor here for 38 years.
Have you heard of something called SEL?
No.
Have you?
No.
Social emotional learning.
Not familiar with the term specifically.
No, I really don't.
So how would you feel if you knew that your child or grandchild's teacher was spending a significant amount of academic time sitting on the floor in circles with kids and helping them talk about their feelings instead of learning to read and do math?
Yeah. I think the feeling part could be left to the parents, and I think the academics should be left to schools.
Do you agree?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Well, in the Round Rock ISD district, social emotional learning is a part of the curriculum. We are also a Capturing Kids' Heart campus, one of the only ones in Round Rock. So we are really child-centered, and we really support absolutely social emotional learning.
I believe that having a well-rounded sense of emotional intelligence is an important part of becoming a human being. It would be important to get the agreement ahead of time of what portion of the school day would be allocated towards discovering and understanding emotion. I think too much of anything will throw you out of balance. So if they should be learning math, but the parents didn't agree to it and now they're sitting around, as you say, talking about their feelings, a couple questions. Is that time being used constructively? Or, is it a waste of time?
Good points. Good points.
It's nice to know about kids' feelings. Maybe they just lost a loved one and they're very sad, or maybe they've got some mental, psychological issues going on, but teachers are there to teach.
Kids will get a survey to fill out. Their parents never see it, and it asks them about how they feel that day, if they feel safe at school, if they feel safe at home. Asks them questions about their gender identity, their sexuality. How do you feel about that?
It makes me want to vomit.
They should not be planting the seed in these young kids' minds about that kind of stuff. They're underage.
Yeah, do you think parents should be consenting or approving whether or not their kids are getting information like this from their schools?
100%.
Very much so.
Well, there are always varying opinions, but the kids, for the most part, They are very opt to talk about those things, especially if it's something that's bothering them. So they do bring it to school.
To understand a baseline of your average child's emotionality, sure, until puberty hits. Keep sexuality out of public education. Let the parents do it. What is seen as optimistic education could become indoctrination.
Yeah.
And so I think, especially until puberty, leave it out of the classroom, please.
The districts implementing these third-party surveys, asking young children about their emotions, their well-being, if they feel safe at home, if they, their sexual identity, things like that. Do you think that's appropriate for schools?
No. And I've got a granddaughter in a school where there are a couple of kids that come to school as cats. They want a litter box in the restroom.
Right. Yeah, they're called furries. So we know about furries. Yeah.
And it's bizarre. Or, like I just said, the teacher that got fired because she wouldn't call a student them.
Social emotional learning is often subtly interlaced throughout the school day, incorporated into most curriculums. Many classroom activities, such as community circles or listening circles, student surveys, school mental health policy, and even disciplinary policy. It is a billion-dollar industry. Trying to define SEL has often been described as trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. It's not at all surprising that most people struggle to understand it. M4LU exists to help with that. Please join us on January 8th for SEL 101, on the 14th for SEL 102, the 21st for the online screening of The Coddling of the American Mind, and on the 28th for our book club covering The Anxious Generation. Our SEL toolkit is live in our resource library and will be updated as information and resources become available and as the issues evolve. We hope you'll check it out. Thank you for listening and for taking the time to get smarter on the issues affecting our children. In the words of our founding father and fourth president, James Madison, the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian of liberty.
Welcome to SEL 101. We're so glad that you're joining us this evening for the first of many academic events with M4LU. My name is Tiffany Justice, and I'm the co-founder of Moms for Liberty. I'll be moderating tonight's event. Our format is a series of live lectures by 3 individuals with key insight to tonight's topic, social emotional learning. Each lecture will last approximately 20 minutes, and then all 3 guests will be invited back on stage for a discussion and question and answer. And so, without further ado, I would like to invite to the stage Alex Newman. Alex Newman is a journalist focused on education for over 15 years. He authored 2 books on education, endorsed by leaders ranging from Phyllis Schlafly and Ron Paul to Pete Hegseth and General Mike Flynn. He was an educator for more than a decade. He is a board member on numerous education organizations, including a major K-12 classical Christian school, a senior fellow at Classical Conversations, the nation's largest homeschool community with over 125,000 students, and executive director of Public School Exit. You can also find him at libertysentinel.org. Tonight, Alex's lecture will be covering the history of social emotional learning, charting the path that it took from ideas to ideology to federal mandate and into your child's classroom. Please give a warm welcome to Alex Newman.
Thank you guys so much for being here in person or for watching us over the live stream. Really appreciate it. It's a great honor to be here. And before I start, I got to talk to you about these pronouns, right? We're being told that we just need to use the pronouns and what is it going to hurt? And I'm here to tell you that actually pronouns can kill. And people say, what do you mean? How can pronouns kill? Well, they/them. It took me a minute to get it, but I thought it was pretty funny. So we're going to talk about the history of social-emotional learning today. And before we even do that, I'm going to argue that the whole idea behind SEL goes back centuries. Not necessarily the specifics of it, but the idea of manipulating young children to believe things that they wouldn't have believed otherwise, things that their parents would have never found acceptable. And at its core, SEL really is about changing the attitudes, values, beliefs, the worldview, the spirituality, and the behavior of children. And interestingly enough, this is actually acknowledged by a lot of SEL practitioners. I would argue that SEL is just the latest and most sophisticated method of doing this, but it's just the latest in a very long line of trendy sounding tools that are aimed at fundamentally transforming not just America, but the world by transforming the hearts and the minds of the next generation. So one of the very obvious precursors to SEL was called values clarification. And I still remember as a child at an international school being subjected to this values clarification. This was actually launched in the United States in the mid-1960s. And I'll never forget the impact it had on me. It was transformative, exactly in the sense that the people behind it would have hoped. I was in 8th grade geography class. I was living in Brazil at the time. And our teacher says to the class, you guys are sailing on a ship, and now your ship is sinking. So you got to jump off into the lifeboats. And here's the scenario, boys and girls. Well, there were still boys and girls back then. You all jump into the life raft, but there's 11 of you, and the carrying capacity is only 10. So what are you going to do now to make sure you can all survive? This is for the greater good, after all. So you guys get together, and here's the list of people who are on the life raft with you. You've got a teacher, a doctor, a nurse, a lawyer, an engineer. Who are you going to kill to make sure that the greater good is accomplished and all of you can survive? And so we got into our little groups and we started talking about, who do we get rid of? And the obvious answer was, of course, the lawyer. And just kidding, there's great lawyers out there. But what happens is, in one moment, these children become transformed because they were taught all their lives by their parents, by their pastor, by their Sunday school teacher, that there is objective right and wrong, that murder is always wrong. And here we're now confronted with a situation where murder appears to be the only ethical and moral solution. And so there is actually a very obvious answer to this. Well, you don't kill anybody. You just take turns swimming alongside the raft, and then nobody has to die. But that wasn't one of the options, of course. And so what happens is now all these children who for their whole lives had confidence in their parents and their pastor, in one instant lose all of that confidence. Their worldview is transformed. They no longer believe that there is right or wrong. There's different shades of right and different shades of wrong. And this has profound implications on a child. This continued into the late 1980s as George H.W. New World Order Bush started trying to bring about really a national education system. And one of the key people he hired for this was Dr. Shirley McCoon. Dr. Shirley McCoon, a very interesting lady. She wrote a book in partnership with some spiritual entities that she claimed to be communicating with. It's called The Light Shall Set You Free. It's available on Amazon. I encourage you to check it out. It's bonkers. And she actually got up in front of the nation's governors and said, look, we are witnessing now the total transformation of our society. And she said one of the key functions of schools is to bring about this change. She called it the social change function of schools. So this has been going on for a long time. And long before values clarification, which, by the way, the UN says should be used on every child in the world, you had the Soviets coming up with methodologies for transforming the minds of children. If you go back, you see the Soviets were obsessed with this idea of creating a new Soviet man, somebody who would be selfless, somebody who would just work constantly for the greater good. And ironically and terrifyingly, the work of some of the key Soviet psychologists actually underpins SEL, and many SEL practitioners acknowledge this all the way to today. I refer, of course, to Lev Vygotsky and his associate Pavlov, infamous for his experiments with dogs. So think of SEL as a kind of Soviet-esque effort to create a new kind of person. It works very insidiously and very deceptively. And so what they have done here is used manipulation of language to sucker parents and principals and teachers into participating in this radical transformation. So they come up with these new competencies that affect what they call the affective domain. And these are structured right into the SEL programs. And so they use words that we all know and generally agree with, like empathy and compassion. How could you not want your child to be empathetic or compassionate? You must be some kind of barbarian. And so parents say, oh, well, I want my child to be empathetic and compassionate. I want him to have self-awareness. What you don't realize is that they mean something totally different than what you mean, right? When they say, and I've seen these programs. I've seen it in use in multiple schools. This is in almost every school in America now, public school, and many Christian schools as well. And so you look at these programs and they tell the parents, oh, we're going to teach your children empathy. What you don't realize is that empathy To be considered empathetic, to qualify on this competency, you have to believe in open borders and abortion and homosexuality and gender ideology and climate alarmism and wealth redistribution and gun control and race extremism. And if you don't believe those things, you're not empathetic. And they'll give you very moving situations, you know, the poor girl who needs an abortion, and how could you not have empathy with the abortion in that case? So this is very, very deceptive, and it actually tricks the children into thinking that they came to these conclusions on their own without realizing that they have been manipulated in an incredible way. And one of the things that's most fascinating to me about this whole process is that the leaders of the SEL movement acknowledge so much of this in their own documents. It's just that nobody reads them. If you go to the leading organization promoting SEL today, CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social and Emotional Learning, funded, of course, by Bill Gates and the Rockefellers and a whole bunch of other nefarious characters, I pulled this right off their website. They say SEL competencies can be leveraged to develop justice-oriented global citizens. Well, you might believe that global citizenship is a good idea, but that's a value judgment. And who do you think you are, public school, to impose that value on my children with my tax dollars without even getting my permission? So they're bragging about what they're doing. They say that these programs will get, and this is right from their website, these programs will get children to assess power dynamics and confront issues of race and class across different settings. Well, I don't want my kids obsessing about what skin tone they have. I don't want my kids obsessing about what skin tone other people have. Why are you putting my kids in this situation? Right? And so children are expected, according to the CASEL website, to develop an understanding of systemic or structural explanations for different treatment and outcomes. They're leading children down a predetermined path to get them to come to certain predetermined conclusions that will give them certain predetermined attitudes on everything from politics to the environment to religion. This is completely unacceptable, I think, regardless of what we may think about each of these particular issues. You don't have to agree with the people promoting SEL or with me to recognize that these are things that ought to be in the domain of parents and family, not unelected bureaucrats and government institutions. So in short, we are expected to believe, the children after this SEL program, this ridiculous hypothesis that America is systemically racist, that we need structural reforms, that only tearing down our country will fix these alleged problems, and only massive government-led social engineering can fix it. And this is supposed to be the inevitable conclusion of some of these SEL programs. In other words, it is Marxism, it is ideology, it is critical theory masquerading as education. And some of these programs actually rely on actual Marxists for their programs. I have seen several that rely on a fake historian called Howard Zinn, a guy who was a proud Marxist, who was a member of the Communist Party USA, whose books have been debunked over and over and over again to instill these new attitudes, these new beliefs in children. Another competency you hear a lot is self-awareness. And who doesn't want their child to be self-aware? Well, what they actually mean when they talk about self-awareness is they're going to pound Marxist notions of gender and race into the minds of your children, these notions of power and oppression, this hyper-focus on identity, and are you oppressed? Where is the intersection of all your identities? These are very controversial things. Another key competency that comes up over and over again in SEL programs is that we need to compromise always and everywhere. Do we really want our children to compromise always and everywhere? Should they compromise their moral values, their principles, their liberty? I mean, do we want our daughters to compromise when a boy is harassing them? I would think not. So these are things that are very controversial. Now, my first exposure to SEL was in Florida. A friend of mine was teaching history in a public school, 7th graders, and he was asked to teach, to show a series of videos to his first period students. He was a history teacher. And he sent me these videos. He said, Alex, I'm being told I have to show these to my students if I want to continue my employment here. These videos, I watched them, I actually exposed them. I wrote an article about them. They glorify homosexuality and bisexuality and transgenderism under the guise of promoting inclusiveness. How do you feel about that, right? Is the topic that comes up over and over and over again. Now, of course, the people pushing this think it's great. They think that this is the inevitable arc of history, that we're getting more and more progressive and inclusive and all the rest of it. But again, this is usurping the authority of parents over their children, and it's happening in a very surreptitious way. In short, we are being misled and lied to. What these SEL fanatics are trying to do is reshape our society and the world by reshaping the hearts, minds, values, and beliefs of the next generation. So let's do a historical roundup in the few minutes that I have left here. If you go to the early 1800s, values in America were almost universally a belief in the Ten Commandments, the Golden Rule, do unto others as you want others to do unto you, marriage and family as the organizing unit of society. Government exists to punish evil, not to educate your kids or give you free money or health care. Private property is as close to sacred as can be. After all, God said, thou shalt not steal. And God gave us our rights. Government exists to protect those rights. This was the almost universal understanding of Americans at that time. And then somebody who thought we need to change that came along. His name was Robert Owen. Rejected Christianity. He was a Welsh utopian. Rejected the ideas of Christianity, private property, family, etc., and set up a communist commune in Indiana. When his communist commune failed, he concluded the reason why is that these children had been educated and raised by parents in an individualistic Christian society, and so the solution was to have the government take over their education. And he wrote very extensively on this. He wrote an essay called The New View of Society, or Essays on the Formation of the Human Character. And as you read it, you think, wow, that sounds a lot like the SEL fanatics today, right? We're going to use education to change the mindsets of your children. Now, this didn't take root in America very quickly. It went to Prussia via the ambassador, and Robert Owen brags about this in his autobiography. He says the Prussian dictator so much approved of these ideas that he ordered them implemented in his country. And that eventually paved the way for the government to take over education, not just in Prussia, but in the United States as well. Now, one of his associates, a man called Orestes Brownson, described some really incredible things in his collaboration with Robert Owen and another woman who was working with him. He wrote something called The Oration on Liberal Studies. And he said that the purpose of this operation that they were engaging in was to shift public opinion so that the government could take over education, and to elect legislators who would support that idea. And he says, and I'm quoting here, the great object was to get rid of Christianity. Not by arguing that Christianity is silly, not by debunking the principles of Christianity, but by capturing the hearts and minds of children and manipulating those children into a certain predetermined outcome. Now, the system in Prussia was imported into the United States by another man who wanted to socially engineer society using the school system. His name was Horace Mann, got himself selected as the first ever Secretary of Education. He was in the state of Massachusetts. Of course, that was we didn't have state or federal education bureaucracies at that time. And under the guise of ending sectarianism, he wanted to de-Christianize education. He thought that if we could use these progressive new methods, we would reduce crime by 90%. And he publicly said that we who are engaged in the sacred cause of education are entitled to look upon all parents as having given hostages to our cause. That all paved the way for John Dewey, another man who had a different set of values, a different set of ideas that he wanted to instill in your children for the purpose of fundamentally transforming society. He was a religious man. He co-authored the Humanist Manifesto. He was an admirer of the Soviet Union, and he wanted a socialist and communist America. But he knew revolution would never work. So we needed to have a revolution in the classroom that would fundamentally transform these children. With help from the Rockefellers and other very powerful people, including many in the new field of psychology, he was able to basically take over education in the United States. And let's fast forward now to the 1960s. We had a Yale psychiatrist, Dr. James Comer, at Yale University, one of the leading luminaries behind SEL, started exploring something he described as emotional intelligence of children in New Haven, Connecticut, and trying to get schools more active in dealing with the so-called mental health of their charges. And he got a lot of followers over the years. Other people from Yale, including Dr. Peter Salovey, a psychologist at Yale, and they eventually teamed up in the 90s with Daniel Goleman, a New York Times reporter who popularized all these ideas. Then they partnered with something called the Fetzer Institute to disseminate these ideas and these teachings, and that's where things really get weird. I was on Castle's website before they scrubbed all this. I was working on a piece for the Epic Times about this, and right there on their history tab, they said that the idea for SEL came out of the Fetzer Institute in, I think, 1994. I thought, that's interesting. I've never heard of the Fetzer Institute. We have to dig more. And it didn't take long to figure out that this was a center for New Age thinking, for the occult. The Fetzer Institute was founded by a disciple of a lady called Alice Bailey, who comes up over and over again in education circles. She founded the Lucifer Publishing Company. That gives you some hint about what she believed. And she also claimed to be communicating with these spiritual entities. And she believed that we needed spiritual growth to guide people to wholeness. And these ideas, of course, underpin everything that the SEL fanatics are doing today. And they say it so openly. Castle also teamed up with Linda Darling Hammond, a key Obama-ite who played a major role in the Obama transition on the education front, later went back to California, started trying out some of these ideas, and actually had free reign at a school at Stanford, an experimental school, and within a few years, it was in the bottom 5% of all the schools in the state of California, a state where just a fraction of the students are even proficient in reading, writing, or math. So you can understand how bad this was. Now, this term, socio-emotional learning, originating out of the Fetzer Institute, was then pumped into every school in America. Starting in Illinois, it moved out from there. The federal government started promoting it, and my time is running up very quickly. So I did reach out to some of these people to try to get their thoughts. I wanted to present their views honestly. Very few of them responded. The Fetzer Institute did not respond. Castle originally said they were going to set me up with an interview. They ended up backing out of that. But as you read their website, it becomes very, very clear what's going on here. They are manipulating our children surreptitiously. Now, the UN has been openly advocating a fundamental transformation of the values, attitudes, and beliefs of children for many, many years now. And you can see this right in the text of their international agreements. If you go to Agenda 21 in Chapter 36, they talk about education must change the attitudes, values, and beliefs of children. If you go to the Dakar Summit in 2000, they said governments must change the attitudes, values, and beliefs of children. And again, if you go to the origins of the methods being used here, you end up in the Soviet Union. I mentioned Lev Vygotsky briefly. He was a Soviet psychologist who was really focused on how do we effectively brainwash the next generation to create this mythical new Soviet man. He wanted the kids to become good communists. And so using the tools of psychology, collaborating with others, including Pavlov, they set out to try to change the attitudes of children. And again, Vygotsky inspired the SEL promoters by their own admission. You can even look in the peer-reviewed literature on this. They credit Vygotsky as one of their inspirations. They use many of his tools. And Vygotsky, of course, was very closely connected with many of John Dewey's associates. Vygotsky actually wrote the foreword to the Russian translation of E.L. Thorndike's Principles of Learning Based Upon Psychology, published in Moscow in the mid-1920s. Thorndike, of course, was a very, very close ally of John Dewey. So, folks, we have here a situation where the UN is now trying to mainstream this on the entire world. They have a whole agency working on this, UNESCO MGIP. It's the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education on Peace and Sustainable Development, completely dominated by actual communists, card-carrying members of communist parties, and New Age wackadoodles. And again, you can find all this on their website. And this has been the reality from the beginning. The first leader of UNESCO, Julian Huxley, was a humanist, just like John Dewey, and a eugenicist who believed certain races were better than other races. So they're telling you what they're doing, folks. They now have a world core curriculum that they say should be taught in every school, to every child, in every country. And if you read the writings of Alice Bailey, the guy who wrote the World Core Curriculum said it's based on the teachings of Alice Bailey. We mentioned her earlier, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. What you will find, and I've studied Alice Bailey's books in depth, including her book, Education in the New Age, very open about the fact that the schools will lay the foundation for, and I'm quoting here, the emergence of a new species of human being, a more highly evolved unit. Through education, self-consciousness must be unfolded until the man recognizes that his consciousness is a part of a greater whole. So, folks, we have a serious problem here with what's happening with our children. The NEA, their Foundation Global Learning Fellow, Wendy Turner, says SEL is now the top priority in the public schools of this country. And it is no exaggeration to say that that has displaced any semblance of academics as the primary concern for our educators. They're proud of this. They're doing it to your children as we speak, even in many Christian schools. And folks, it's about control, it's about manipulation, not education. For thousands of years, children had empathy, compassion, and self-awareness. This evil program has nothing to do with those things. It must be exposed, stopped, and rejected for the sake of our children and our country right now. Thank you guys, and God bless you.
Thank you, Alex. That was great. Thank you, Alex. That was excellent primer to get us started. Heavy stuff. Doesn't sound so great, social emotional learning. Sounds very nice, doesn't it? But the origins are quite scary, and it's so important for us to understand that. Next, I am proud to introduce my friend, Kelly Schenkoske. Kelly is an independent researcher an education advocate, and host of A Time to Stand podcast, where she addresses education concerns, parental rights, and politics. Witnessing alarming ideologies in her children's school in 2016, she's from California. It's kind of like Vegas. What happens in California doesn't stay in California, right? It compelled her to begin extensive research. That research confirmed the need to get involved. By 2019, she began leading grassroots efforts in California, training groups of engaged citizens and supporting parents in need of help. Kelly has been on the front lines and engaged in the national debates on nearly every issue since. Passionate about safeguarding families, Kelly continues to expose dangerous ideologies, provides parents with practical resources and support, encourages good teachers, and trains groups around the country, and has been a true friend to Moms for Liberty. Please welcome to the stage, Kelly.
Thank you so much. I'm just so thankful for my dear friend Tiffany. What an immense, wonderful work she has done and is just a dear friend. I'm thankful for all of you tuning in to this important presentation. Social emotional learning is what started my journey as a mom, as an activist, as an independent researcher more than 8 years ago. I was just a mom. I was not going to school board meetings. I was taking my children to school. And at the time, I was advocating for more lunch recess. I wanted a little bit more playtime at the school. And back at that time, I learned that the school district had started a new program that was actually taking away the last 10 minutes of lunch recess for very, very busy elementary school students. And at that time, I learned that instead, those 10 minutes, the students were additionally seated outside usually, and the principal was leading them into daily mindfulness meditation using a Tibetan singing bowl. And so it was through that I ended up learning of this. You know, parents these days, it's really important that we make ourselves aware of what's happening in the classroom because the schools are not telling us. There's just this generalized theme that I've witnessed and experienced personally of don't tell mom or dad. And so I'm thankful for Moms for Liberty University being launched because we're telling mom and dad. So that time I met with the principal, and he shared with me, Kelly, kids are facing more difficulties today than ever before. And we have a new program, and it's rooted in neuroscience. And we're here to educate the whole child. It's a new program called Social and Emotional Learning. And so what we're going to do is we're going to not just focus on education, but on all the other things that impact a child's school day. And we're going to promote kindness. And he, in my opinion, and what I received was he marketed the program to me as the mom. I knew at that time nothing about social emotional learning. I did not know what the whole child model was, but I knew one thing. I'm the mom. My husband is the dad. And I was determined to figure out exactly what was going on. So that began nights and nights of research. And so today I'm encouraging everybody tuning in, these packets that have been provided for you, the resources, soak them up. The information is immensely helpful. Alex Newman's speech just now was incredible, but this is in your schools, and this is advancing even beyond the school walls and into the workplace for adults. So I want to share with you a little bit about how it makes its way into various school districts, because when it began in my children's school, it was one facet of the school day. But then shortly after, I learned it was going beyond just the school day. I learned that the communications app that the teachers told me was just to tell me when special events were happening at school was in actuality also being used for social emotional learning. There was this app called Class Dojo, and I was given notifications when special events were happening at school, but then I found out from my little first grader that they were watching various videos about social emotional learning in their classroom. I learned that they were having brain breaks at rainy day lunch recess in the classroom where social emotional learning topics were being infused into the school day. I also learned back then that the school district had brought in what was called the tapping solution, where students are taught to tap on what is perceived as energy meridians on the face and state comments about themselves. And then the school district was at the time considering a program called Mind Up curriculum that I was told, again, is rooted in neuroscience. Whenever somebody makes those claims, it's important, especially today, to understand what is the definition of the language that they're using. And in regards to what their claims are these studies accurate? Are these studies valid? Would they pass as an actual study that is holding any weight or true evidence? Because one of the big things I came across in my research was a lot of statements that these are evidence-based. But who does the research? Are they the proponents themselves? Because that immediately discounts the evidence that is what they're being used to bolster their entire agenda. So in my research, I ended up, through that experience, in that time, especially after meeting with the principal, I felt as though in that moment, I also received some parenting advice through social emotional learning that he was talking about. And I thought, this staff person may not even realize it, but I get the impression they're asserting their role in my child's life over me, the parent. And parents, you have the right to direct the upbringing of your children. And so from that moment, I knew that I needed to research as much as I could, learn as much as I could, so that I could really, truly assert myself. I am the mom, and they are my children. So in the schools today, social emotional learning, there's a couple things I wanted to share with you. CASEL, as Alex mentioned, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, they have a portion on their website, on their school guide, that talks about equity and social emotional learning. Equity is really being applied through a neo-Marxist lens for equal outcomes. It is actually doing a lot of damage in schools for something that purports itself to be advancing education. But here's one of the quotes on equity and social emotional learning. Social emotional learning is a way to uplift student voice and promote agency and civic engagement. So these are marketed phrases that are often put through perhaps even groups that are public records, are public relations experts, and people who understand communication, because they are selling SEL to a widespread audience, and they need that optimal buy-in from the public in order to continue this program. So keep that in mind when you're reading this. Promote agency. What does that look like? Student voice. What is that about? Civic engagement. The way these are manifested in the school day, all of those phrases are really in turn to promote student activism, and not just within the classroom, but outside the classroom and within the communities. So they say, continuing forward in this school guide from CASEL, when SEL, social emotional learning, goes beyond behavior management and positions young people as experts in understanding and fashioning a world that is more just and equitable. So again, just as Alex shared, this is about transforming a country from within using its children. And what are they doing? Children, keep this in mind when you're faced with things happening in education. Children do not possess the typical capacity to process everything happening. And so they naturally, this is one thing I tell a lot of parents, children look up to teachers. They look up to doctors. They look up to a lot of adults in the community because they are adults. And it is important to understand that there are adults who are misusing that authority in our children's lives. And so, as Alex shared, one way to change a nation, one way to do this that they're working is to change and subvert the child's value system. I remember I filed a public records request on a school district in California on social emotional learning in an elementary school district. And the contents that I received included promoting activism and social justice. It also included what was very telling to myself was shifting from I to we, which is a very big theme I'm seeing out in California. Tiffany shared, we're not Vegas. What happens in California doesn't stay in California. And right now, California is faced with some fires, but in the same way, there is activism and educational fires, and the wind is blowing east. The wind is blowing across the globe. And so it is important to be appraised and aware of what is happening in my state because it's not staying in my state. And the goal with social emotional learning is also systemic. So they want to change the entire system. There's an article from Castle that talks about systemic SEL, and it states, a systemic approach ensures that SEL is woven into all students' educational experiences, more than a single lesson or activity. SEL is integrated across key settings where students live and learn. Pay attention to that, live. Classrooms, schools, homes, and communities. So the goal of social emotional learning, again, when it started in my children's school, it was one facet of the day, but then it became another facet of the day. We found it in education technology. It was infused into computer lab. It was found in the English classes, in the school library. It was found during special kindness weeks, which again, to the public, it appears very nice. They need that optimal buy-in. But what you end up with is this model that progresses towards this transformative change model goal that they seek to change the nation and the community and the children from within. And so it's something we must take seriously. I remember in my early days, I was going to talk with different people about this program, and they said, no, it's really good because my child can center themselves, and it's really just about kindness. No. We must always be aware of not what is just put in front of us, but look 10, 20 steps ahead and understand where this is progressing us towards and understand, as Alex shared, where it came from. The United Nations is playing a very big role in advancing this. There's actually a TED speech on YouTube that you could look up. It's called How Social and Emotional Learning Can Bring a Better World. And that speaker goes on to talk about the global social emotional learning that they've planned, and they talk about a U.S. Department of Education study that followed and tracked the social and emotional analyses of students within our country. And again, they touted how this was evidence-based, of course. But what is really important to understand, too, in this speech this man gave was that he talked about the key time in a child's life when their value system is being developed and how that is the time to change children, to change citizens. So imagine you're sending your children to school for a quality education, to advance in mathematics, to love reading, to learn how to write, and to enjoy those formative years learning and growing and being ready for what their life will hold. But what's happened to our school system, it is being used to turn children into activists and to change them into a collective global culture. It was interesting, Alex shared about this, global citizenship. Global citizenship education is being widely introduced in California, and it derives from a critical theory called critical global citizenship theory. And these are all agendas. Again, they have a history, they have a present, and they are working towards a progressive model. Another thing that I wanted to share about, too, in August of 2020, there was a Pennsylvania State College of Health and Human Development issue brief, which discussed how SEL was going to be used to promote equity. And it stated that with this agenda comes the opportunity to dismantle, rebuild, and restore our collective humanity and commitments to each other. Very similar to the public records request I mentioned earlier of shifting society away from I to we. This individualism departs and collectivism is what it's replaced with. Another thing that people may not be aware of, because again, it sounds so good. Our schools are installing see something, say something. And they're doing widespread reporting systems and mechanisms where students are encouraged to report other students who may be in violation of justice, diversity, equity, inclusion. They're using this in my area called JEDI, but it used to be called DIE, and then they switched it to DEI, and now they've turned it into JEDI. What will be next? But for your important effort in understanding this and looking into this, social emotional learning is far more than just kindness. That is your marketing pitch bait. It is a bait and switch. And in the school districts, it is additionally woven in now as in the district I did the public records request on, as not just a portion of the school day, not just found in an entire class, but as a pedagogy, the art of teaching. So teachers are being trained to use social emotional learning as the lens by which all classroom instruction occurs. I'm starting soon to wrap up my presentation, but let me share a couple other ways that SEL makes its way into the classroom. Also, data collection. It would be unfortunate if I didn't touch on this portion. Students are already being analyzed on a regular basis on their social and emotional and behavioral score, which is something that the teachers and the staff can reflect upon. And then that goes into a data system, sometimes on education technology platforms that the schools keep and use as a data tracking. So in the past, when I was growing up, we would be understanding that teachers kept record of incidents at school or food allergies and health issues and grading and assignments. But today, with the whole child, the whole portion of whole child is to depart from a sole focus on education and embrace every aspect, the nutritional, the home life, the mental health, the emotional and social side. There is a biopsychosocial model that's being used in schools in California, and we're seeing health clinics pop up on school districts. So there are many different ways that this infuses itself into the school day. Data collection from teachers, data collection from programs, and then in addition to that, the way in which social emotional learning turns into transformative social emotional learning, where it turns into action and activism for belonging, civic engagement, student agency. These are all the words that they like to use. But I encourage you, parents listening, parents like I was, go to your school district website, look under the board packets, look for the contracts. In the area I live in, a school district recently went into contract with an organization called Playworks. And Playworks actually works to come and they might send staff who then analyze the students at recess and at playtime. And they sometimes even work their way into making adjustments for recess. And in addition, we're seeing it enter into the sports teams. So different companies can be contracted and introduce social emotional learning. And all the students are being encouraged into this model of conformity to then align to the CASEL competencies, align to the transformative CASEL competencies. And thereby, it is this peer pressure system as well. You send your child with your value system, your own beliefs, and now they're getting the government's value system installed into them over 30 plus hours a week when they're present. So Today, I want to encourage you parents, be vigilant, be informed, make others aware, look into your school board packets and those contracts, and do what you can. Social emotional learning must go. Thank you.
Okay, moms and dads, so you just heard from an amazing mom who just started asking questions and did some research. And the internet, we talk about the ills of technology and how it affects our lives in many ways. And Moms for Liberty University will discuss those things, but it's also a world of information and knowledge. And it's right there at your fingertips, and you can find so many different things. So Kelly is just a testament to investing and really putting time into understanding what your children are learning at school. So thank you, Kelly, so much for that. Next, I'm honored to introduce our final speaker tonight, Dr. Jennifer Kamm. Dr. Jennifer Kamm is a full professor of psychology at Bethany Lutheran College in Mankato, Minnesota. Her extensive course offerings include human development through the lifespan, child development, gender development, abnormal psychology, personality development, and fundamentals of counseling. Dr. Kamm earned her undergraduate degree in experimental psychology from Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She then pursued her master's degree in human development and her PhD in developmental and child psychology from the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas. Our children are clearly bombarded with SEL practices every day. It has been woven into every facet of their school day. Dr. Kamm is here to tell us more about what these practices may be doing on a psychological level with our children. Please welcome Dr. Jennifer Kamm.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here this evening. So I teach psychology. As you heard, I teach a variety of courses. One of my favorite courses, I teach it every semester, human development. Human development. Development is a pattern of movement or change that begins at conception and continues through the human lifespan. It's a pattern. There's movement and change. SEL doesn't give us that, does it? It really puts us in a box. If you hear nothing else from me tonight, hear this. You are right. Trust your gut. I could stand up here, and as you heard, I teach a variety of courses. I could put a bunch of numbers in front of you. But the bottom line is, if I show you an apple and I show you a bag of Cheetos and I say which is healthier, you know this. This isn't rocket science. You don't need a PhD from the University of Kansas to know that you should be choosing the apple. It doesn't mean on a given Friday we might indulge in the Cheetos. But when it comes to the well-being of our children, we need to go with our gut and choose the apple. And it's not that complicated. So if you hear nothing else from me tonight, know that you're right. You have the right to be concerned. We don't have to be fearful of this, but you have the right to be concerned. Don't take your eye off the ball. Your children are your greatest asset, and it's your job to safeguard their well-being. Your job. It's not my job. It's not your teacher's job. It's not the coach's job. It's not Trump's job. It's your job as a parent. It's your God-given responsibility. Okay, so I teach a variety of classes. I'm only going to focus on one, which is my favorite, human development. So in any human development textbook, it's organized around Erikson's theory. So Erikson proposed, way back in the day in the 1960s, a psychosocial model, which is a nice framework that goes over the human lifespan. I'm going to very quickly step you through what takes me an entire semester to get through with students. So here we go. So hang on. So as we heard, so just as a reminder, SEL, what is SEL? What is socio-emotional learning? Well, it has 5 major components. We have self-awareness. We're trying to help children have self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So I just want to remind you, when we talk about SEL, those are the 5 major components that have evolved. What's pretty much agreed upon, those are the goals. So those are the goals. All stages of development this touches upon, and we need to be honest about what's happening in our classrooms. This is group counseling that's happening, and that's the realm of psychology, okay? So what's going to happen here in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to step you through what the psychosocial stages are, and I'm going to share with you what I see as some red flags of how having this with children in a group setting is not appropriate. On an individual setting at home with parents, perhaps one-on-one with the teacher as they notice things on the side, being a good citizen. It has nothing to do with their vocation as teacher, but just being an adult who cares about a kid. This can be helpful, encouraging a child to be a good friend. Having a friendship worksheet, nothing wrong with that, right? But where we extend it into words like transformation, that's where we get into the realm of counseling and psychotherapy. So let us begin. So I want you to think about your kitchen table. This is the metaphor I'm going to use to unpack this really quickly with you. Think about your kitchen table. Your kitchen table is solid, right? Hopefully it all came to mind. What does your kitchen table look like? What does it feel like? Your kitchen table is solid. We like to be there. We often have intimate relationships with our kitchen table. It's something we're familiar with. And we can go into other people's homes and we know what their kitchen table is. We can identify the kitchen table and we can have an idea of what goes on at a kitchen table. That's where we play with our Play-Doh. That's where we had our first set of color crayons out. That's where our child wrote their college application. That's where they came back and told us that they were going to have your very first grandbaby. We also shed tears at our kitchen table. It wasn't always happy. Right? We have a relationship with our kitchen table. It's something we count on. What is our kitchen table? It's something that's steady, that holds us up. It holds the food. Everything else can be falling apart in the house, but you have someone sit down at their kitchen table, and if it's wobbly, they will go fix it. They can't get through the meal, right? Until it's steady. You got to fix that. It's going to drive everybody crazy. We want it to be stable. I'm spending a long time on the kitchen table because that's trust. Erickson said that our very first stage is trust versus mistrust. There's this tension that we have between wanting to trust the world. We come out into the world wanting to know that it's regular, it's routine. We want a sense of familiarity. We crave it. A baby's first glance will be toward the sound of its mother. It gravitates toward the smell of her, the taste of her. If the dad's been in the picture, the first time that baby hears the voice, that's where the attention goes. It's the familiarity. We love that. And we crave that throughout the lifespan. Now, there's a tension. We don't want to be overly trusting. We don't want to go to just any mom, any dad, any teacher. We have to build a trusting relationship. First step is trust. That's your kitchen table. The second that really we're faced with, and we never conquer any of these. We're just always, this is a tension that's facing us. But that's the first one, and all of these are lifelong. But again, they're more prominent at certain points in our lives. The second one is autonomy versus shame and doubt. So this is 18 months to 3 years of age. This is where we figure out, I'm not you. This is my seat at the table. I'm not sitting over there on your lap anymore. I'm me, and I don't like peas. So that's when we figure out we have different tastes. We're different than you, Mom. We're different than you, Dad. Autonomy. I'm me. I get to be me. The next one is initiative versus guilt, 3 to 6 years of age. This is where I can. I'm sitting at this table in my spot, and I can feed myself now. Do you remember that feeling of when you could first do it, and it was just like you just ran a marathon. You were looking around going, I did it. I did it again. I did it again. I can feed myself. Next, industry versus inferiority. This is 6 to 12 years of age. This is where we're comparing. So we're looking around and we're identifying, I now have a fork and spoon, but I haven't been allowed to have the knife yet. And once we get the knife, we discover maybe our knife isn't as short as other people's knives. We're into comparisons. For the sake of this illustration, I'll keep going really quickly. Identity versus identity confusion. So this is our teen years. Actually, this one I need to include for tonight's presentation. What do I prefer? Am I more of a coffee drinker or a tea drinker? Do I like hamburgers? Do I like Chinese food? Who am I? What does it mean to be me? That's what we do when we're 12 to 18 years of age. For goodness sake, we don't do that when we're 3. We don't do that when we're 8. This is something that comes later. Next, we have intimacy versus isolation. generally, we have to figure out ourselves. Then we get into who do I want to sit at the table with? And I'm going to be sitting with them for a long time, so I better like them. So intimacy versus isolation. Who am I sitting at the table with comes generativity versus stagnation. I'm the person now responsible for making sure that everything's on the table. I had to buy it. I have to clean it up. I have to make sure that this thing called the table is happening. That's generativity versus stagnation. And the very last one is integrity versus despair. Have I done a good job? Was I a good host or hostess? Integrity versus despair. So that's the lifespan in a nutshell. So now let's unpack socio-emotional learning in this context. So trust versus mistrust. Am I safe here? Is it okay to be me? This has a lot to do with attachment. I drove here this evening with my Uber driver. I'm not going to share with my Uber driver or my dentist intimate information about my life. That's not a conversation that I'm going to have. I will have that conversation perhaps with a trusted friend or a family member. But thankfully, I wasn't in the situation like our children are of having to unpack things like that with my teacher. Trust versus mistrust, it only works in a therapeutic relationship if we can build on that relationship. It's a one-on-one conversation with you and a trusted adult who has training in the field of psychology, training that takes a long time and a lot of effort and a lot of self-reflection of, is this the path for me to become a counselor? Whether it's school counseling, military counseling, clinical counseling, a lot of time and effort is put into making sure that those that get into that profession know what they're getting into and they're capable of doing the very difficult, challenging job of being a counselor. It's very different than becoming an educator. So children who are put in this situation of, in the context of trust versus mistrust with SEL, if we haven't developed basic trust with our teacher, and we're put in a situation of having to be vulnerable and open, it's grossly inappropriate. And it's grossly inappropriate for us to put the other children in the situation of having to listen to this. When it comes to mistrust, it's also encouraging children to be trusting of people that may not have their best interests at heart, that may not be safe. Their friends may not be safe, and believe it or not, despite our best efforts with our elementary and middle school and our high schools, our teachers might not always be safe. We just need to be honest about that. We are sinful, fallen human beings, every single one of us. Not everyone was meant to be a counselor. Not everyone was meant to be a dentist. Let each do their job. I understand that teachers are having a very difficult time of it now. Absolutely. It is very difficult. I see it in their faces. It is hard to be a teacher. But if all the children were having some kind of heart condition, would we say, well, it's your job to do heart surgery? Is that what we do? And furthermore, if the situation is that bad that it needs to be done all day, I ask you, would you like to go to work and have therapy done with your coworkers and then not be able to leave and have that be all day embedded nicely into all of your different tasks for the day? This is not the job of a teacher, and it's not appropriate from a trust standpoint, which is the foundation of everything that follows. And so I'm spending a little bit more time here on the trust one because it's the foundation. The foundation of trust leads into attachment. So we have different attachment styles. Attaching and trusting someone who either doesn't mean you well, is not going to be there for the long term, doesn't have a one-on-one relationship with you, may not have heard or seen when you raised your hand to share that day, that type of rejection is going to really hurt the attachment relationship that in a weird way was being fostered in the classroom and can trickle over then into that home attachment relationship, which is the primary attachment. We want to foster close attachments with our children. I would argue that kangaroo care, many of you are familiar with kangaroo care when you brought your babies home, were to hold them close, keep them close. Children develop best when they're held close. We miss the mark, though, I would argue as psychologists, by implying to the public that there's a point of which you put the baby down. Now, of course, we put the baby down for various reasons. Absolutely. We need to do laundry. We need to go to work. But metaphorically, we need to do kangaroo care throughout the lifespan. There's never a point at which you abdicate that responsibility. Hold them close. And this having someone else hold them close for 8 to 9 hours a day is not good. That's not their job. That's not their relationship. Even if my Uber driver drove me all the way to Florida, that's that relationship. We need to respect the boundaries of that particular relationship. So what does it take to be a counselor? I just want to spend a moment on this because we're expecting educators to be in this role. Educators, what are educators? Educators are responsible to prepare students to become knowledgeable, responsible, engaged citizens who are capable of participating effectively in democratic society. And they're responsible for teaching academic, social, practical skills necessary for personal growth and economic success. They foster it. They don't transform it. If you go into the transformational area, that's psychology. If we're transforming people. If you do it in the classroom, you know what that's called? Social engineering. That's what that's called. So what is counseling? Well, counseling is for those kids who need a little extra help. Their parents have identified that they need a little extra help. Circumstances have come their way, or they're having a little bit more trouble in some area, and they just need a little bit of a nudge to function more appropriately. It gives them a systematic and intentional nudge. It provides words and encouragement for them to develop more options in their lives. It gives them the words. They don't have the language at this point to describe what their problems are. Their prefrontal cortex is not developed until much later. And when it's really starting to kick in during late adolescence, they have a whole lot of hormones kicking in. And at that point, we all need to be honest, we couldn't trust what we thought to be our problems because we had a lot of other things going on biologically. Psychotherapy is what we do, and that's the transformational issue. So children who have been diagnosed with a trained professional, not someone who has a 4-year degree in education, children who have been assessed in a systematic way by a trained professional, sometimes we need to do things to really help them in a longer way that's more remedial. And that is with the goal of gaining insight into chronic issues, into trauma. It's a private relationship, and it takes a long time. Quick topic, countertransference. So if you haven't been trained in psychology, one of the issues that you probably aren't aware of is that countertransference, this idea that we, as the person who is providing this mock therapy in the classroom, can often have emotional responses to the client that has nothing to do with them, that has more to do with our own history. We're projecting them onto the child. We're over-identifying with children's issues. We're developing parental feelings toward the child. We're experiencing possible sexual attraction to the child. We're sharing excessive personal information with the child. We're offering unsolicited advice or pushing for actions that the child isn't ready for. Effective therapists provide empirically supported therapies, evidence-based practice, empirical supportive treatments, standards of care and supervision. They are aware of evidence-based research related to their clients' particular problems. They are receiving ongoing training. It doesn't end with your master's degree or your PhD. To get your master's and PhD in counseling means that you've gone through up-teen classes in psychology at the undergraduate level. Then you went on to have a master's degree, which required 80 additional credits. You had 700 or so hours of clinical supervised training. Then you had 1,000 or more hours once you pass your licensure. Then you go on to have additional supervised training in a specialty area. And only when you have that specialty area will you get together with a group of kids who are experiencing the same issue. You would never get together a group of mixed experience kids to have group therapy. That's just not a thing. It's just not a thing. Anyone trained in psychology would know not to touch this with a 10-foot pole. We shouldn't be placing educators in this position. Unfortunately, I am running up against my time. Well, let's see. So how would I like to end? Yalom has curative factors that we talk about of what makes therapy successful. The reality is we can't do, even if these educators were trained in counseling, this is not the setting for it to take place. You can't instill hope in a group setting with so many things going on. We just can't do it. And when we have students with social media in their pockets, kids can be cruel. The type of information that is being revealed and solicited in these settings, even with the best teacher using the best therapeutic process in between social studies and math for that 15 or 20 minutes, you don't know where that's going to go and how that's going to end up and how that is going to follow that child for the rest of their lives. One last thing, mirror neurons. So I'm going to step away from, I don't have time to go through the rest of the stages, but let's just focus for just a moment on mirror neurons and how amazing those are. So mirror neurons, our brain at the cellular level is learning constantly. And mirror neurons are those neurons that are unique in their pattern because they don't just come on with a specific, they have a response pattern that's not specific to what I do. It's the response pattern is specific to what I do when I smell an orange or I see an orange or I eat an orange. Those neurons have the same response when you do it. We are traumatizing children in our society by our choices that we make in our home. The choices we make, the choices we don't make sometimes. We don't want to compound that at school by learning about all of the loss, all of the pain that's happening. Schools should be safe spaces where children go and they're learning the joy and wonder of learning that can hopefully be lifelong. Fun. The education majors, when they sort themselves out into where are you with your identity search, often, it's almost always, the nursing majors and the education majors are the ones who have identity foreclosure, where they really haven't looked around and they're certain of where they're going to go. They're such a lively, joyful group. We need to let them do their jobs. Schools should be fun. Schools should be about learning. Schools should be about academics. Leave the psychology to the parents and to the trained professionals. Thank you for having me.
So this question is, am I good? Can you hear me?
Yes.
This question is for Dr. Kham. How do parents articulate why they are concerned about something that sounds so nice and touchy-feely as social emotional learning? When I'm trying to talk to another parent or to a teacher about it, what do you think the best way to communicate that would be?
To communicate your concerns about these type of programs?
Yeah.
And you were talking to another parent?
Yes.
Okay, to another parent.
Or to a teacher or to anybody.
Well, for the teacher,
yeah.
I would do some questions. One thing that teachers really resent is the amount of paperwork that they already are expected to produce. That it's less about actual instruction and it's already historically been about paperwork. Quite frankly, I would, if it were my child, I would say, could you tell me what your ongoing training is going to be? Could you provide me with the materials that you use to prepare for this year's program? Also, I would like a weekly summary from your perspective of the gains that my child has had. And ideally also, if you wouldn't mind, I would really appreciate daily updates so that I can carry your wonderful work in the classroom home with us around the dinner table. I would really appreciate that. And then furthermore, it would be wonderful if you could provide me as a parent with the training that you think is valuable for me to have, and if you could provide me with those resources. Because once we start eating into their time and into their energy, I think, and recognizing that, I would also like to know what your treatment plan is. And could you provide me the references to all the treatment interventions that you would suggest? And I'd like to have options. And I'd like to know also, recognizing, I didn't get into other issues of privacy and confidentiality, but masking the names of the other kids that are in my child's class, I'd like to know what their issues are. If you could provide me with documentation also for that. Because, you know, my child came home the other week and they were upset, and I didn't know that the other one's dog died that week. I would really like to have an update on that. So bombard them with the necessary paperwork that counselors are required to provide.
No, that makes perfect sense. And then,
Kelly, do you have any suggestions that you'd like to add as well? I think that's brilliant, by the way. I think it's so interesting to really drill down on exactly what methods are being used in the classroom. And your point about the other experiences that children are sharing in this group therapy session that's happening, you're right. I mean, they're starting every day off sometimes with this group therapy session where they're marinating in their feelings, and dogs die, and people's parents go to jail, and things happen in kids' lives, and the fact that they're soaking in this.
And we're training up pathology.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what we're doing. We're training rumination. We're training, instead of focusing on what is good, right, and salutary, we're focusing on the very opposite. And then that would be a pushback too. Help me understand in your classroom what you're doing to focus on what's wonderful, what brings children joy.
Right.
When do you do that in your group time?
Right. Because otherwise it's this game of, well, there's something more awful than that.
Right.
Like, oh, I can say something
top
that I can top that. Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of what we see on social media too,
It's
right?
industry versus inferiority. For middle schoolers, this is a game to them. Who's got it worse?
Absolutely.
My knife is sharper than yours.
Yikes. Kelly, do you have something you'd like to add?
Yeah, when it comes to talking with other parents, if they have not yet had a personal experience of concern with the school district, I think there's multiple ways to talk with parents, whether it's starting a book club in your home and reading a quality book like Abigail Schreier's book, which is going to be highlighted within Moms for Liberty University, or I encourage also what the teachers union does. The NEA years ago had been encouraging California teachers to invite groups of parents and teachers over to homes to put out a charcuterie tray, have a nice evening, and then introduce their politics. But you know what? We can do that too. So have a charcuterie tray, have some nice, fun, relaxing time talking with people, but then also have a moment where you're just talking a little bit about social emotional learning. Bring up some of the topics. What do you want for your child's education? Should the school be a place of academic excellence, of merit? Or should the school now be responsible for the whole child, for everything else? Are you comfortable with your children's social and emotional and behavioral scores being analyzed by staff and recorded on data, various data collection agencies? And then when it comes to teachers, one of the things I also observe is that there are many teachers who have been taught and trained that these are good things. And so it's little bits of that relationship, being able to enter and insert little bits of truth. Maybe take them to coffee or bring them a coffee and just have a discussion in the classroom. It may take some time, but there are some teachers that are definitely concerned about this. And the more awareness we build in our communities, the better we can address this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a question from online. We're going to start with Jennifer. The question is there data showing that SEL is not helping improve the mental health of students? Is there a possibility that SEL makes bullying worse?
Absolutely, without a doubt. I think when we look at many of the issues that I'm going to just wreck the name, Janet Twenge showed, when we look at generational changes over time, I think that is the illustration of the effect that this is having on an entire generation comes out when we look at their generational norms. The rate of suicide is going up, and we can't attribute it all to COVID. The rate of needing additional psychological services is going up, skyrocketing. There are so many, just look at the generational trends that are happening. It's not just at the individual level that we're seeing that it's not, this generation is in crisis. We're seeing it as a group that they're in crisis. That said, though, I must say that there's a ray of hope that, again, there's a pattern of movement or change. And we grow in wisdom with all of our experiences. I mentioned the kitchen table. We all love the kitchen table that's been beat up, right? We listen to the guy on the train who looks the most haggard, but seems to be the most clean. We like to listen to his stories because he's been through some stuff. That's going to be this generation. They've been through some things at a very young age, and they've had to process way more than any one of us had to process because they've been put in the situation of having to process everyone's problems. Imagine how wise they are going to be. And what is wisdom? It's the ability to solve problems. They may not be able to solve the problems that their generation is facing, but I genuinely believe that there's hope out there, that they're going to be able to help the next generation solve really complex problems because they've been faced with more problems than we should have ever allowed them to be faced with.
And I'm going to challenge everyone, go on X right now or go search online and look at the suicide rates and what happens during school, when school is in session, and when it is not. Because during Christmas break, during the summer, suicide rates plummet. And when school comes back into session, they skyrocket. Why is that? What is happening in these schools that is making these children so suicidal, right? And so that evidence there to me is very, very clear. And I think we need to talk about that more. Kelly, one of the questions, another online question, the go-to pushback when speaking about SEL is often, who doesn't want kinder, more self-aware kids? What kind of a monster are you, Kelly, that doesn't want, a loving, safe, inclusive environment in the classroom? So what are the best key points that you can share to help people to refute something that sounds so good but isn't?
I think it's addressing exactly that tactic is also helpful. I think one of the things that I didn't see in education many years ago is the marketing that does occur. There's organizations that do market this. And I think it's important for parents to be able to tell others, in the same way, this is a very simple example, in the same way you would observe an infomercial on television and you wouldn't just go and immediately buy whatever that infomercial is selling, you'd understand, okay, this is an infomercial as seen on TV. Maybe this is not a product I'm going to be purchasing. But in the same regard, we need to start analyzing the language that's used in these programs, looking into the contracts, looking into the organizations that the schools are contracting with themselves, which you can do from their website, from their social media. Look on Instagram, look on Twitter from these different companies that are being connected to your school. But talking with others, yes, you're going to get pushback, but it's important to encourage them. We have to look beyond the curtain and then start asking pointed questions. How do you feel about the school district installing spirituality into the classroom, especially if it might be different from your families? How do you feel about the school shifting society from individualism to collectivism? And once you have that opportunity to establish those relationships, keep going with the little bits you learn. You can always teach somebody something.
I remember seeing a video from the Fetzer Institute where they said, when we took God out of the classroom, we threw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think we've posted that on our Moms for Liberty Twitter thread before our X thread. And it's so interesting because they filled this void, right? It's big business, Alex. We've got a question online and someone wants to know, how do we expose the funding being given to schools to implement these programs? Where, you talked a little bit about the origins. Who's making money off of the fact that 95%, if not more, of schools, public schools across America, are utilizing some type of a social learning, emotional learning program in the classroom?
Yeah, that's a very, very effective tool for getting pushback riled up. When you show people that Bill Gates and the Rockefeller Foundation and these billionaires, and it's interesting because the right and the left can kind of unite on the idea that we don't want the billionaires deciding what our children are going to learn. We don't want the billionaires deciding what kind of spirituality our children are going to have. So this is a really, really effective tool. And a lot of this stuff is pretty transparent. Some of these organizations have Form 990s where you can see where the money is coming from. Some of these organizations even post on their website who is funding them. So you have a lot of these huge so-called philanthropic organizations where there are huge conflicts of interest. Bill Gates' foundation is a good example of that. It looks like philanthropy until you look at the investments and you see he's also pocketing money on the other side. And Bill Gates is actually a really good example on this very point. In 2004, he went over to Paris to sign an agreement with UNESCO, and Phyllis Schlafly ended up publishing that online and making it well known. But he signed an agreement with UNESCO where they agreed, he was signing on behalf of Microsoft, they agreed they were going to jointly develop global education standards, global curricula, global teacher training programs, and global technology systems to implement it all and ultimately to get the data to track it all and manipulate children. Well, who's going to be the beneficiary of that agreement? Well, of course, Microsoft is, and the shareholders of Microsoft are, and Bill Gates is going to be. So right off the bat, you don't have to be an ideologue. You don't have to even disagree with the things they're teaching children to say, wait a minute, this guy's ripping us off. He's doing philanthropy and then making a fortune. And you see the same thing with so many of these other institutions and organizations. There's a huge industry now that is profiting off of this. You look at the amount of money that's spent on public education every year. When you include college, we're talking over $1 trillion a year. There's so much money here. There is so much corruption here. And I would argue that's a very, very effective way to push back on this as well, because no matter where people are on the political spectrum, no matter what religion they are, we all agree we don't need Bill Gates deciding what our kids should learn.
I think that's great. And I think we're really primed, Alex, in this moment right now with Bobby Kennedy coming into HHS and him really exposing a lot of the capture with Big Pharma and a lot of these people that are trying to use their money to transform our country. And I think the American public are really waking up to that. And so showing those connections, showing that there are these global masterminds that are, using our children to transform America is important. I think people are ready to see those connections now. The next question is President Trump aware of how prevalent SEL is in our schools, even in private schools? I think it's worse in private. Does Moms for Liberty know his plans and next steps to rid our schools of this? I'll take this one for a second. Yes, he and his team are aware of it. I was lucky enough to be able to interview President Trump. He really thinks what's happening in the schools is absolutely bananas. He can't believe that it's happening. It's shocking to him. He said when we spoke, I really think they don't like the kids, I think is what he said. He said, I just don't understand how this is happening. Max Eden, a good friend and a fellow at AEI, has done an enormous amount of research on different issues of SEL in the schools, sexual orientation and gender identity being woven into the schools. Max and I had the privilege of being able to work on the education platform for the Republican National Convention. And definitely there was a list of things that also people needed to be aware of. I'm excited because I think that President Trump is picking some excellent people to go and work with him on education who are very tuned in to what's happening in our schools and how it needs to be brought out. Now, how is he going to do that? Well, there are competing ideas, right? You have people that would say abolish the Department of Education. Senator Mike Rounds, we spoke about this a little bit, has a 7-page bill. He's a very nice man from South Dakota. However, one of the questions when I met with him that I asked was, are we cutting the head off of the snake by abolishing the Department of Education? Or are we, in this 7-page document, creating a hydra where we are spreading all of this into the different departments, other departments, where we won't really be able to really end woke, end this toxic ideology and critical theory that's entered our schools and recapture and reclaim America's public schools. So I think there are some hard questions that need to be answered. He's going to need the help of the legislature. The best advice that I can give American moms and dads in this moment right now is make sure you're talking to your representatives and your senators about these issues. Make sure that they understand what is going on so that when President Trump and his cabinet members are looking for legislation, or looking for support for legislation, that these representatives understand that you're watching them and you're paying attention and you want them to take action and you're not going to allow our children to be forgotten. Immigration and the economy, our border, all of these things are so incredibly important. But if we do not reclaim and reform America's public schools, we will lose our country. We will lose this generation. We will lose the next generation. We have to put a focus on our children and prioritize them right now. We've got some more questions. I'm hearing everyone's very much enjoying this. So this is such a wonderful event. You guys are doing such a great job. Let's see. Next question. The curriculum at my son's school is too focused on teaching about tolerance for other religions. What advice do you have for making sure he stays kind and tolerant, but doesn't stray from the light of Jesus and American family values? So this is really a religious liberty question. And I think we're seeing this a lot. And I'll start with you, Jennifer, with the gender identity stuff, right? It really is a teaching that's antithetical to the teaching in the home. Many religions say there are men and there are women, and we were made in God's perfect image. What are your thoughts about this? Or would you like to start?
How long do I have? Okay, so one activity that I have with the students in the classroom at the beginning of the semester, conception. So we're going to become parents this semester. What's one word that you want to focus on as a parent? What's your goal as a parent? And I get all these different words, and so I put them on the dry erase board. I want them to be happy. I want them to be healthy. I want them to be successful. I want them to fight for justice. I want them to not live in my basement. I get some funny responses. And then I challenge them. How many of you in this room are Christian or have Judeo-Christian background? And sometimes I have them raise their hand. Generally, I just throw it out there. If you're a Christian, this is our goal. It's one word. Heaven is our goal. Heaven. That's our goal. All the rest of this, whether our kids get caught up into SEL or not, I'm glad that this question was asked because, quite frankly, this is the issue of the day. Going back in time, all the generations, everyone who's older has always said the next generation's going to hell. Well, to be sure, a bunch of us have gone to hell. And a bunch of us were happy, healthy, successful, good friends who are global citizens, and they're happy and healthy in hell. The hours of our day that we do have our children for are valuable, and we really need to safeguard those hours. So while they're at school, we fight the good fight and try to talk to our teachers, talk to our principals, galvanize with other parents. But outside of that, those hours are valuable. Where are we on Sunday mornings? We're told to worship. We're told to gather together and be in fellowship with other Christians. After school, how important is that soccer match? After school, is that more important to be with your friend or to be with your brother and sisters? Is that more important to be at my dinner table or at someone else's house? Every single afternoon after school matters. Every single weekend matters. And they add up, trust versus mistrust. Even though they're having 7 hours a day at school with all of this, they hopefully have a lifetime with you and all the people that you're introducing. And that repeated measures over time, that's where it's at. That's where the most powerful shaping occurs. Give them a foundation. And that's you and your worldview, whatever that is. I'm talking from a Christian worldview perspective, but whatever it is, you have the responsibility of instilling that worldview. And you have a shot at it, but it's not going to happen if those after school hours and weekends are sucked up with other activities or work.
I loved that you used the kitchen table conversation because I think one thing that would really help America get back into going in the right direction would be family dinner. Mm-hmm. Sitting down every night with your family, sitting down with your children, talking about their day. So I just loved your analogy in a lot of different levels. So thank you for that. Okay, another question. We've got another question for Jennifer, Dr. Kalm, but I'm going to say, let's see. This is a great question, and I think it's important. Mental health interventions, this is medical care. Parents have the fundamental right to direct the upbringing of their children. This includes their education, their medical care, their morality, their religion. So we have medical care happening in our schools without the consent and knowledge of parents. Someone would like to know, Dr. Jen, what kind of training does a school counselor have compared to you?
Okay, so a school counselor has training specifically for that population. So what I read off to you during my presentation, they would have an undergraduate degree in psychology. They would then go on to have a master's degree. Then they would go on to have licensure. They have continuing ed credits. They're in a position of supervising. If we're going to have these type of programs, they would be in a position of supervising them. But they hopefully, and I don't see it, I'll be honest with my field, I don't see that psychologists have stood up and said we should not be medicating boys for being boys. I didn't see them stand up for that. I didn't see them stand up when we shut down all the schools. I didn't see them stand up when we had the transgender issue, which I teach child psychology. Textbook upon textbook going back decades, I don't see this in the textbooks. This did not come from us. This was not a thing. This was an invention outside of us. What was the original question? I'm sorry. So school counselors, right. But one school counselor can do an effective intervention with a child in a one-on-one setting, and then selecting a handful of children, 6 to 8 ideally, in a small group setting under controlled circumstances with children who are at the same point in their grief journey, we'll take it. Children who have recently lost a family member. Now that's something that a school counselor would be, but we would have the parents would be involved. Right, yeah. We would have issues of confidentiality that would be safeguarded. For testing and assessment purposes, any intervention we would be closely monitoring. that's what they would do, but they would never do it in an open public access classroom.
No, I always feel like with the there's something called ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences that they, and they scored children based on how many ACEs they have. And I always felt like with the SEL, even when I was on school board, it was like Oprah, like trauma-informed care for everyone. Like everyone gets a car, right? Everyone gets the same.
One size fits all.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so we have a question from the audience again. So if you'd like to come to the microphone, that would be wonderful.
Yes, this has been a tremendous program. So thank you so much for organizing it, and to each speaker. I feel like you all are so well informed. Just as an audience member, and building on what the first question was from the audience, I've had a conversation with someone who has a child in public school and has special learning needs, and they're concerned. They hear the social emotional learning, and they think, well, the teachers are working with us to teach the child to take turns, to raise their hands. Some of the things that special learning needs take a little extra time with. And so they feel like, oh, well, I need those things as part of and they're not understanding the bigger picture, all the things that you all have talked about tonight. So those things would just be teaching them student skills or life skills. That would be separate from this program. Or what is it? How do I address those concerns with people who say my child needs that extra social emotional learning? And I'm thinking that's not what this is. How do I explain that to them? And I know taking them out to dinner and so forth, but sometimes those things are just a conversation. I don't know how to address that. Thank you.
I can start. Not everything that you're going to see in a socio-emotional learning program is going to be objectionable per se. There's plenty of, and Dr. Kalm alluded to some of this, how to be a better friend. I mean, these are things that nobody in their right mind would find objectionable. And I'm always reminded of rat poison. Right? Rat poison is 98, 99% delicious rat food, but then it's 1% toxic poison that's going to kill the rat. And I think SEL is more than 1 or 2% toxic poison, but there is enough unobjectionable stuff in there that if you just look at it very superficially, you don't know what all the buzzwords mean, you don't want to sound dumb and ask questions, you might say, oh, well, maybe that's good. I do want my child to be a better friend. But as you dig into it and as you see that there's an ulterior motive there. And it's very easy to demonstrate this using their own documents. They will tell you that they're transforming society, that they're transforming the values of your children. So you can say, we can teach a child how to be a better friend without also teaching them that they need to agree with transgenderism or global citizenship or abortion or open borders or drug abuse, et cetera. And so we need to separate the good from the bad and recognize that when you were talking, I was just thinking of Satan, right? He disguised himself as an angel of light. So the SEL proponents are not going to come and say, hey, we're going to destroy your children. We're going to lead all your kids to hell by teaching them to reject your parents, reject God, reject your country. They say, oh, we just want to help your kids. So we've got to look past the marketing, to your point. We've got to look past the focus groups and the studies that they did to make it sound appealing and recognize that there's poison embedded in there. And you can have the good parts without the poison. But this whole SEL banner is, I think, really a marketing ploy, a disguise to conceal the poison so that it can be put in the children. And I think that's what we really need to explain, that there's okay stuff in there, but you can separate that out and not have the poison.
And when you recognize the poison, I think we need to be realistic about where this may end up. Again, as positive as I am about Generation Z and their ability to turn it around, I think in the meantime, I'm thinking back to my graduate training at the University of Kansas. We had a very strong behavioral program, and it was well known for helping kids with autism. And there were parents around the country that would pick up and move their entire lives to Kansas or to the Northeast, where there were centers. I think we need to be honest and open that we may get to a point where you need to move. For the safeguard of your children and their everyday experience, you may need to move. And there is no standard curriculum, so it may be in that particular school, it is as simple as, let's practice raising our hand, let's do a happy as we know it song. Those are great things. But when you've identified in your community that it's not, and you don't see that you're making headway, this is your child's life and well-being that we're talking about, their very identity. Those parents of kids with autism were willing to leave wonderful practice. It was generally for people who could afford it, that could leave. But the reality is, who can afford not to? One of my mentors would always say, children will get your time, your energy, and your money. Your only choice is how to give it to them. Your time, your energy, and your money. This idea that we can kick the can down the road and try to just figure it out later, our children, those issues are going to compound over time, and we may need to consider moving homeschooling, gathering, seeing what our options are, and they may be radical options.
I just want to give, go ahead.
Oh,
Kelly.
yeah. One of the things I want to add is with regards to any student in school. When I was growing up, my mom often said to me, Kelly, input often equates to output, and what you feed is often what grows. And so when you have a system of a value system being incorporated into the school day, and that is what is regularly fed, I had this happen with a personal experience where the children were taught to try and work things out just themselves. Don't go get an adult right away. Just try and work things out by yourself. And so the way this ended up is that the child in the home life wasn't regularly coming to the parent to tell the parent, hey, something went on and I'm concerned about this. So just that simple habitual thing that was happening in the school day, Monday through Friday, found its way into the home. And so this is, again, such an important reminder that we set a solid and firm foundation for our children, and we're there to encourage them, build them up. Those family meals, those are so important and impactful. It's a great time to ask questions, to instill values and virtues into our children. And I just think that is a big part of this, but also that awareness of what's going on so that you can also make your children aware. Because one of the things that children are used to is saying yes and being obedient, but they have to also be aware that there are adults that they need to say no to. And there's plenty of times when they need to, in the middle of the school day, be having the ability to say, you know what? I'm going to call my mom and my dad. I need to call them right now. I actually need to call them and go to the office and talk to them about this first.
When you're a mom, you tell your kids, you get that, I did, you get that funny feeling in your tummy. Or if you know that something's happening and you think mommy wouldn't like it, you should trust yourself. And I've always felt that social emotional learning is telling that child that funny feeling maybe is a problem they have to get over for the betterment of all of the kids in the classroom. And it's so damaging, and it puts children into these situations where they don't trust themselves anymore. And our instincts and trusting our instincts, like you started with, is so, so important. I'm going to give a huge shout out quickly to the moms and Moms for Liberty who pulled their children out of burning school buildings, but are still fighting for the kids that are inside the schools. We have so many moms who have woken up, who are homeschooling their kids or have moved them into different schools, and yet they are still running chapters of Moms for Liberty, informing their communities, making sure that other people know what is happening with their kids. And being part of Moms for Liberty has been such an amazing blessing because the women and the dads are amazing warriors for the children in America. When you go into a classroom as a mom and you volunteer, you're oftentimes not working with your own child. Right? Maybe your kid's doing okay, but you're going and you're working with other children. Moms and dads love kids. And when you see this happening, you need to get in and we need to root it out. So thank you to Moms for Liberty moms and dads. I think we have another audience question. And while you're coming up, I'm going to ask Kelly and Alex just to address this online question. They wanted to know what are the things, the specific mechanisms that are being used in the classroom to turn kids into activists?
Do you want to start?
Sure. One of the things that's happening is particularly introducing kids to different topics. Kids are being taught in many classrooms and through curricula today about who is the oppressed and who is the oppressor. In one school district, I filed a public records request. There were 29 different intersectional identities. They identified who the oppressed was and who the oppressor was, including if you have a clean criminal record, you are now oppressing those who are felons. And it taught that restorative justice was the activist solution. Students are being taught how to go to school board meetings, many times getting extra credit to do so. Students are taught to pair with local activist groups. In California, there's multiple activist organizations that regularly call into the Sacramento State Legislature where I live, but this isn't just California. Students are being taught how to develop a narrative and a counter narrative. When they're going somewhere and they have an activist that takes a different stance, they're taught how to develop that counter narrative to overpower whatever that other person is saying. And they're taught how to understand school board, state legislature, how to go and engage and give public comment. And so in many ways and facets, they are taught activism, and they're taught activism for one political cause. And so this is why it is so important for us as parents. even if you are homeschooling, I love that Tiffany said that. If you are a homeschool parent, if you don't have children in the schools, you are a taxpayer. You are somebody with a voice. You are somebody with a mind. And many teachers that are activists, some of them do not have children in the school district. So don't let that curtail your efforts to make an impact in your community.
Yeah, I agree 100% with all of that. And one of the things that they do, and I've seen so many different examples of this in different contexts, in different parts of the country and even around the world, is once they get children to have the right values, say, okay, injustice is bad, there is systematic oppression. Now let's come up with some hypothetical scenarios. You see XYZ person being discriminated against, or you see this policy that is going to have a disparate impact. How do we go about fixing that? Okay, well, let's do it. And so some really clear examples that I've seen, actually in California, they were giving students money to become activists. They were using taxpayer money and paying them to go out and protest, paying them to get involved in the political process. So that's just about as blatant as it gets. In my home state of Florida, just a few years ago, they were caught in Collier County, which is a very conservative county. And I've got the video of this. They're brainwashing the kids with global warming hysteria, teaching them that carbon dioxide, the gas they exhale, is somehow a toxic pollution. Only the UN can save us. And they do these weird songs. It looks kind of like a cult scene. It's very weird. They dress up as polar bears. And then they get the kids, after all the brainwashing is done, they say, here's a letter. Now, sign this letter. We're going to write to our congressman and tell our congressman that he needs to support climate solutions and carbon reduction. So it used to be more concealed. Now they're just openly telling the kids, if you want to be a good person, you have to be an activist. They're giving them money. They're giving them grade incentives. So, and a lot of it is start with the brainwashing and then give them scenarios and then give them outlets to vent their frustration.
So Moms for Liberty University will be covering something called community schools. And community schools, we'll get into it more, but they seek to make the schools kind of the social welfare center of the community. And it's very interesting because they bring in school-based health clinics, they bring in counselors. It's a lot of public-private partnership between nonprofits who get access to your children. One of the best questions you can ask is, besides the teacher and the other staff at the school, who will have access to my child this year? What partnerships do you have? Life skills partnerships. Do you have that my children will be taught? And they'll say, well, we have someone who comes in and does drug awareness. Well, my daughter was taught how to make meth. There was a video shown in Florida schools that showed them how to actually make the drugs. Why would we teach a child how to do that? As far as the activism and the letter writing, Moms for Liberty moms and dads will remember letters that came to me, actually, and Tina from a class complaining about Moms for Liberty activism. And they all wrote us letters and told us how horrible we were, and they drew rainbows over everything. And so that was actually happening in a public school where they came after Moms for Liberty. So it's really, really fascinating. Audience question, please.
Hi. I have a question. I believe it was Kelly who brought up student surveys really briefly. Apologize. Okay. I'm very concerned about those and how the data might be being used. Would you and any of you mind expounding more on that and what can parents do?
Yeah, it's really important to be aware of whatever your school district is using. I actually had a insider share with me a little bit about a program called Power School and Schoology, and the degrees to which the students, each individual student was being tracked on their social and emotional and behavioral analysis from the school staff. And that was being saved in Power School. I started reading up about Power School, and they champion themselves about collecting and maintaining this data even when students and their families move. Some of the data may be kept on families. There's teachers that often also do their own data receiving and data surveys that they choose on their own, sometimes without even consulting a director of curriculum sort of person in their district. So in many ways, this is being received digitally. Another thing that's really important to be aware of, and this came especially noticed out of Spreckles, California, anything your child does on that tablet that the school gets is also something that every district can observe. They know what your children are searching. They know what every word is said in the private chat. So you imagine people get nervous about Alexa, these things in their home that might be listening to them. But every single action that they do on those school-issued computers, those Chromebooks, is watched. Yeah. And in Spreckles, California, 2 teachers were faced with legal action because they were actually personally inviting students to an LGBTQ club based on student searches and observations of their students in the class. So
I'd like to add a little bit to that if I can. So it is worse than anybody can actually imagine. It's not just the survey. The surveys are terrible. They're asking kids all kinds of questions that nobody ought to be asking them, things that even if they weren't gathering the data would be very troubling. How many sexual partners have you had? Why are you putting that thought in the mind of a 12-year-old? What's wrong with you?
What drugs have you used while you're having sexual intercourse?
Exactly. How does dad talk to mom at home? What kind of food do you have in the refrigerator? Does anybody in your house smoke or drink? I mean, these are questions that the government has no business knowing. Even if they weren't gathering this data, they shouldn't be asking the kids because it puts questions in their mind. But it's much worse than that. I've got reports from the U.S. Department of Education going back well over a decade where they're bragging about hundreds of data points that they're gathering on every single child, everything from dental health to mental health. And now they have technologies. I have a 2012 U.S. Department of Education report where they're talking about some of the technologies that are already in use in federally funded programs. And it's not all schools yet. But one of the things that really jumped out at me was a facial expression camera. And so what's happening is the children are being exposed to what they describe in the report as various stimuli. Maybe there's a transgender individual, a guy wearing a skirt. And then this facial expression camera is supposed to determine what their facial expression is, what that says about their response to it. That is then processed through algorithms, put into a database, and then these are going to be used to determine whether there needs to be an intervention with this child because he or she might have the wrong attitude. Oh, you don't think transgenderism is good? You made a funny face. You've got those bigoted Christian parents. Mm-hmm. This one needs an intervention. And they say in that same report that they're going to use this data to make predictions about the future behavior and beliefs of your children. So all this is being captured. A lot of this got rolled out during Common Core. They bribed state governments to create these state longitudinal databases. They're all interlinked. They all run right to Washington, D.C. So the Department of Labor, the Department of Justice, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Education have all of this data. And it is used, first of all, for helping determine the path that they want these children to take. Oh, this one's going to be a conservative Christian. He definitely can't be a lawyer, a teacher, a journalist, anybody that might influence anybody, right? So we steer him on a different path. But they also use it to manipulate. So as they gather this data on these children, and now with the devices being rolled out, it is orders of magnitude worse. They're figuring out, what do these children believe? Does it line up with the competencies? Does it line up with what we want them to believe? And if not, how do we make them believe what we want? So they stage interventions, and they're getting better and better at this because they're figuring out, well, this worked really well to bring the kids to the attitude that we wanted them to have. So and I could go on. It's terrifying. I've been writing on this for well over a decade. And again, it's not just to help determine the future path of your child. It's also to manipulate your child, and it will be used against them.
And they're also selling their data.
That's right.
I was at a conference, conservative conference, a policy conference, and they allowed the sponsor before the education piece to get up and speak to the room. And it was a career app where the kids could talk about what they liked to do, what their skill sets were. They could put in different grades that they had, and it would help to pair them with different career options. And I got up and I said, so are you selling the kids data? And he answered, yes. I mean, he had to answer in front of hundreds of conservative activists that, in fact, yes, they were selling the data. And here we were, a sponsor for a conservative policy summit. So they are selling the kids' data. We're going to cover data mining more in SEL 102 with Abigail Schreier. We'll talk about bad therapy. There's a group, Parents Defending Education, that has done a wonderful job at looking at the surveys and how they're data mining the kids. And just to make you aware, the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment says that children are not to be surveyed about any of these issues. This is against federal law, but there's no private right of action. There's no accountability measure. So it's really the fox watching the hen house. You go to the school and you say, you're breaking federal law. You're asking my kids about all these things you shouldn't be asking them about. And they're like, okay, what are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. Right? And so we need that private right of action. You talk about some things that President Trump, that Linda McMahon, the new Secretary of Education, the Office of Civil Rights can do is really start holding these school districts accountable. In the 52 years of Title IX, money has never been withheld from a school district. I think it's time that we start withholding funds from school districts who are breaking the laws and indoctrinating our kids. There was a question I'm going to go to. It's probably the last one, actually, too, because we're going to share a little bit more about what the rest of this month will look like covering social emotional learning. But this question was actually asked twice. What facets of social emotional learning specifically, and Jennifer, maybe you could answer this and start, are good? Where's the boundary between what types of interventions are good and okay, like anger management, right? You don't hit another student in the classroom. How do you handle if you get angry with a child? Is that appropriate for the school to engage in? You mentioned a couple other things, so just maybe if you could give us an idea of, what's okay and then where it starts to veer off onto a bad path.
Psychoeducation in the classroom does have a place. So that is where we are. How do we play well with others? How do we engage in practices? How do we promote? How do we support and encourage one another? Those are all good things. It's only when we start to do that internal reflection that we've crossed that line where we are encouraging less forward focus and more past focus. And when the things that we're talking about here, we're weaponizing children for political agenda. That's what this is. It's social engineering and it's weaponization of kids. And so, again, I would go to, it's in our gut that we all recognize a friendship worksheet is a wonderful thing. We all recognize that these playful songs sitting in circles are a great thing. Saying thank you to a friend, having a thank you program, that's great. It's only when it goes into areas of tell me about and really that more internal dialogue that we're giving teachers permission to go there with our kids, that we never have expected them to be counselors or psychotherapists. There's a space, and I would say it's a box that it is appropriate for teachers, psychoeducational, where you're providing content that can be assessed, and it's really one-directional. And maybe we have some follow-up assessments of, hey, we covered that in the friendship program where you're not supposed to, shove kids. And I noticed you shoved them, and then I provide a consequence. That's fine. But when we get into these larger worldview issues, that crosses a line. That social contract that we made with schools, it goes into a dark place. But that said, we need to be honest and start having uncomfortable conversations as a society, that our schools are in trouble. Kids are coming. I'm from Minnesota. We have kids that come to school in the middle of winter in summer clothes that don't fit. They're not eating. They're not sleeping at night.
I would challenge you and say it's not the schools that are in trouble, it's the American family.
Well, that's where I'm going. We need to have uncomfortable conversations that parents aren't doing their jobs. And that's hard to say. Yeah. Because it sounds like, so you're high up there. Well, yeah, we need to have basic responsibilities as parents and hold one another accountable. And if a child does transgress at school, there needs to be a consequence, and teachers need to be allowed again to provide those consequences.
I think you don't denigrate the ideal because every child doesn't have two parents at home, or that doesn't mean that having two parents at home isn't a good thing, right? I remember when I was on school board, I remember being in the front office and two little boys got dropped off at school. One didn't have shoes on. They were still in pajamas. They hadn't had breakfast. It was 9:30. And so I went with them to the uniform closet and we got clothes, and then we went to the school lunchroom where they had a horrible breakfast of sugar-laden food. Unfortunately, we need to address that as well. Thank you, Bobby Kennedy. But you're absolutely right, and we need to continue to kind of uphold those things that we do want for children: a healthy diet, good sleep, a focus on education and learning to read and write and do math, and not say because it's happening for every child that shouldn't be happening at all. I think it's a great point. Thank you for that. So that concludes our first M4LU 101. This has been so incredibly fantastic. I want to take a second and say thank you to Robin Steenman, who's the Director of Resources and Moms for Liberty University. A few years ago, I came to Tennessee and I visited Robin's chapter. I had visited a couple times, actually. And Robin was doing this program, and it was just kind of a school year for parents. And she was taking the people of her community through different ideologies and giving them tools and information so she could educate them. Because the mission statement of Moms for Liberty is to unify, educate, and empower parents to defend their parental rights at every level of government. And the unify part, we bring everyone together. But the education part is so important. because we need to have the tools and information to be able to have conversations with people. I think when I try to do this work, I come from it from the direction of most people that are involved, not the Alice Baileys and the John Fetzers and the Bill Gates. Sorry, Bill. I don't think you have good intentions. But the majority of people that are doing this work, even the teachers in the classroom, think that they're doing something good. Even when a parent is transitioning their child, as awful as we might think that is, and we know it is, that parent thinks they're doing what's best for their child. And so I think we have to come at this from a place of being willing to have conversations and educate people about these issues. So thank you, everyone, for listening today. And Robin was doing that in her community. And I said, Robin, you've got to bring this all over the country. Every mom and dad in America need to be able to go through this school year for parents. And so we're so excited that Moms for Liberty University is going to be able to help to inform everyone. So let's talk a little bit about what the rest of this month will look like. Next week, you should join me online for SEL 102 with Abigail Schreier, author of the book about social emotional learning and mental health, Bad Therapy, Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up. And we'll take a focused look at the portions of her book that cover SEL in our schools. On January 21st, don't miss our first virtual online screening of The Coddling of the American Mind. Be sure to tune in and ask your questions directly of the filmmakers, Ted and Courtney Balaker, immediately after the film. Lastly, on January 28th, Dr. Kalm will join us again for commentary on the New York Times bestseller, The Anxious Generation. That's our book club for this month. If you're not reading, you better start reading now. It's an incredibly important book, eye-opening, and it's going to tackle some of the biggest issues that we have with social media and our children having access to this black mirror all the time that is certainly not serving them well in their lives. And you know, if you can read by yourself, that's great, but why not read with friends? So join us, please. That does it for SEL 101. This event has been recorded and will be posted within the week to the online SEL toolkit in the M4LU resource library at M4LU.org. I'm going to say that again because I screwed it up. M4LU.org. Thank you again for joining us. If you'd like to support Moms for Liberty University, please share our resources with friends and family. We do this to help to save America. The purpose of Moms for Liberty is to fight to save America. We are a beacon of light for the rest of the world. We are an incredibly important and wonderful country. And so by sharing these resources, we can reclaim our country for our children. So on the toolkit, you'll be able to get that anytime that you want. Follow Moms for Liberty. We have really incredible lineup for 2025, the spring and the fall semesters. You can donate. Also, none of this happens for free. So we would love your support. If you like what you saw today, if you want more of this, if you want to be able to share it easily with people who may not be able to pay to have access, please donate so that we can make sure that we make it available for every American mom and dad and concerned community member. And thank you again for joining us. As Robin started, I will end. As was famously said by James Madison, the advancement of and diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian of liberty. That is the mission of M4LU. Have a great night.